Hey guys, so today I'm going to be discussing my top 10 books of 2016. This is a video that I've done every year since I began BookTube. It's pretty self-explanatory. These are all books that I really enjoyed, whether they moved me, whether I found something really profound in them, or whether, I just found them really entertaining. All of these books encompass all of those things for me. The first book that I'm going to talk about is The Grown Up by Gillian Flynn, and this was actually the first book that I read in 2016. This book follows a psychic who is approached by a woman whose son has been possessed by a spirit in her house that she believes is haunted. Now you guys know that I love paranormal and I love horror, and mixing that with Gillian Flynn's writing, I just knew this was going to be epic. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. It was gripping the entire time. Again, it's short, but it still held my attention, and it had a twist at the end that I was not expecting. Like with all of Gillian Flynn's books, she always surprises me, and this was no exception. Really enjoyed this one. Would highly recommend. The next book I have to talk about is Spirit Bound by Rochelle Mead. This is the 5th book in the Vampire Academy series, and I really enjoyed this one the most, I think, out of all of them, because it really centered around Rose and Dimitri's relationship, and this book was like all about them, and you barely dealt with anyone back at court like Lissa or just like any of the side characters, which while I do really enjoy some of the side characters, I wanted this. I wanted this so bad. I wanted sort of a really deep study on Rose and Dimitri, and this really delivered in that aspect. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Girl in 6E by A.R. Tour. This is a book that follows a young woman who has confined herself to her small apartment because she has an insatiable urge to murder people. That was one of the things I really enjoyed about this book, because yes, that's the most horrible thing that you can do, taking another human being's life. But the way that she wrote about this character just made me feel like she was a normal person who just had this really big flaw. Another thing I will say about this book is that it is erotica, but it was really well written. It was really exciting. It was really thrilling. It was hot. I'm not gonna lie. The next book that I have to talk about is Clockwork Princess by Cassandra Clare. This is the 3rd and final book in the Infernal Devices series, and I started the Infernal Devices a couple years ago. I read the first book and then I just kind of wasn't hugely into it. I mean, this is such a hype series on BookTube, and I was really let down by the first book, but I decided in 2016 that I was going to finish it no matter what. And so I read the 2nd book and then the 3rd book, and I really enjoyed the 2nd book, but this ended up being just the best book in the series, which I think that most people on BookTube agree about. The story follows a young woman who is in Victorian England, and she possesses a magical ability that puts her basically on the radar for all of these evil, vicious characters. But she comes to meet a group of people known as shadow hunters who help her kind of control her abilities and also help protect her from these evil people. The main thing about this story is just the characters. Cassandra Clare writes amazing characters, and she also writes just amazing plots and stories that just kind of keep you on the edge of your seat and keep you entranced the entire time. She has an amazing gift for that. But the main thing that I loved about this series was the love triangle that wasn't a love triangle. I can't really think of any other way to describe it, but this is the first book that I ever read where I didn't know who to ship the main character with. I didn't know who I wanted Tessa to be with, because I love both Jem and Will so much, and I still love them both so much, and I think that Cassandra Clare handled the ending really well, and it made me cry so much. The epilogue to this book, dear God in heaven, I sobbed. But overall, the Infernal Devices series ended up really delivering, and this book just was my favorite out of the series and one of my favorite of the year. The next book that I'm going to talk about is The Tooth and Other Stories by Shirley Jackson. It's the first short story collection that I have read where I loved every single story in it. It was so gripping. Each story had her beautiful, unique writing, and of course that's really all that you need, but the fact that Shirley Jackson just delivered on all of these plots and just like made you gripped by each of these characters' stories and their paths. It was so good, and I loved it. I loved it so much. The next book that I'm going to talk about is The Girl of Fire and Thorns by Ray Carson. This is the first book in a trilogy about a young woman who is a princess, and her life basically really picks up after her father has arranged a marriage for her. Soon after she's married, she begins to realize that, I mean, there's really no other way to put this, okay? She has this stone in her belly that enables her to have magical abilities, and this is something I think that she's always known, but she didn't realize until recently that the powers that she possesses are leading her to be in grave danger. I really enjoy this story because it does follow a young woman who is sort of the chosen one who has to fulfill a prophecy, and that's just my thing. It always has been since Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I love those storylines. And this was in particular a really good, compelling original one because it followed the narrative of a princess who, she's not your average princess. She's not skinny, she's not beautiful, she's none of those things that mainstream media has everyone believe that princesses are supposed to be. The race in this fantastical world, it's fiction, it's fantasy, it's not real, but it's obviously inspired by Hispanic heritage, which I loved reading about. This character embodied so many cutting edge components when it comes to YA fantasy, and I really enjoyed that probably overall. The next book I'm going to talk about is Falling Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes. Now this book follows a bunch of different characters' point of views, and they all live in a fantastical world with various kingdoms, and each character, or almost every character, comes from one of these different kingdoms, and it shows you their perspectives that they're going through, you know, princesses and princes and people in the minority, people who are going through poverty, and it shows you all of these point of views, which I really loved. When it comes to fantasy, I love reading from multiple perspectives, and this definitely delivered on that front. I will say that I wasn't blown away by this book, but I'm still putting it on my favorites because it's a series that I feel has incredible potential. I do feel like I'm gonna really enjoy this series as a whole. The next book that I'm gonna talk about is Bird Box by Josh Malerman. I read this book in October because I wanted a scary, spooky, unique read, and it delivered on all three of those fronts. The story follows a young woman who has basically lost everything in her life, and she is on a journey of survival in a world that is falling apart. And what's happening in this world is that an entity has taken over and is corrupting people and infecting them into becoming cold-blooded killers. The thing that's so scary about this story is that no one knows what it is. The only thing that people are able to gather is that a person becomes infected by this disease by looking at the creature or the person or the entity. Everyone's boarding up their windows, everyone's covering their eyes, everyone is doing everything that they can to keep away from whatever this is, and what's so terrifying is that no one knows what it is. This was a story that really stuck with me. I had dreams about it, which was terrifying. That's one way when I know that a book has really affected me, whenever I'm thinking about it when I've gone to bed, when I'm no longer reading it, but my subconscious is still thinking about it. This book, it was just so good. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoy survival stories, and this one, it just really delivered. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Alice by Christina Henry. Now, you guys all know that I love Alice in Wonderland. I collect editions of Alice in Wonderland. I collect memorabilia and just like art and anything I can get my hands on that is Alice in Wonderland related. I want it in my life. So this book was no exception. This is actually a retelling of Alice in Wonderland. It's similar to the original story, being that it's like a fantastical fantasy world that a girl falls into, but it's still very different. And the reason it's so different is because all of the characters in the original Alice in Wonderland are not the same. Like in the original book, in the original movie, they're all creatures. And this story, they're actual people, but they have the same names. And it follows Alice as she goes back into the world, and she's a badass mofo. She is like kicking ass and taking names, and she is a really fun character. The final book that I'm going to talk about is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. Now, I didn't list these books in any particular order. I just kind of listed them in the order that I read them in. But I have to say that out of all the books I've read this year, this one is probably my favorite because It was amazing. The story is so strange, and I'll tell you it's strange because it follows a young woman who comes from a family of psychics. Her name is Blue, and she is told from a very young age that she will kill her true love with a kiss. So it's kind of got like that eerie fairy tale aspect in that way, but really just in that way because the rest of the story is just, it's so different from anything I've ever read. Blue meets a group of boys from an academy that she refers to as Raven Boys. They are all kind of upper class. They attend a private academy. They're rich. They drive fancy cars. Now, the reason that Blue befriends these boys is because Gansey, who is sort of the leader of the Raven Boys, was in one of her visions. She wants to befriend him because ultimately she wants to try to save him from an eerie fate. Upon befriending them, Blue is introduced into their world, which is just, it's so beyond anything you would imagine from a group of private school boys. Their main task, or really Gansey's main task, is to discover a Welsh king, or rather the body of a Welsh king, because he believes that if he discovers it, he'll be granted a wish. Like I said, it's so different from anything I've ever read or anything I could ever imagine reading, and the writing style was incredible. The way that Maggie Stiefvater writes interactions between people, it's beautiful, and I don't really know how to describe it. I really don't know how to describe it, but it's out of this world, and I cannot wait to continue on with this series. I will definitely be reading the second book in January. Alright guys, so that's all for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. In the comments below, I would love to know what your favorite reads of 2016 were. I'd also love to know if any of the books that I named are some of your favorites, because you know, that would just be cool to know. This year I found a lot of books that I really enjoyed. I didn't read as many books as I have in years past, but I still was able to find a lot of good ones. And for that, I am so excited and pleased and grateful and all of the things. I truly am. I cannot wait to make 2017 a year for even more amazing reads. I am ready for it. I am so ready for it. Alright guys, so that's all for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you in my next one.